At the bottom of the stairs, my husband whispered, "Don't call the ambulance yet. The house is finally ours." The nanny smiled. "It's about time." The paramedic checking my pupil looked at them. She squeezed my hand and can hear every word. The pain came first. Sharp, white-hot pain that radiated from my hip up through my spine and settled like broken glass in my shoulder. I tried to move my arm, but it wouldn't respond. My fingers lay motionless against the hardwood floor, as if they belonged to someone else. I tried to call out, but my voice was trapped somewhere deep in my chest, smothered by shock and agony and the crushing weight of what had just happened to me. I could see the ceiling from where I lay, at the bottom of the stairs, sprawled in an undignified heap with my legs twisted at angles that shouldn't be possible. The same ceiling I'd painted cream 3 years ago, when Richard said the white was too stark, too cold for a home that should feel warm and inviting. The same ceiling I'd stared at 1,000 times while carrying laundry up and down these stairs, folding fitted sheets in my mind, planning dinner menus, thinking about absolutely nothing important. The mundane thoughts that fill the days of a life that seemed, until this moment, perfectly ordinary. Now it was the only thing I could see. That cream ceiling with the light fixture I'd picked out at the hardware store on a sunny Saturday afternoon last spring. The one Richard said was too expensive, that we should just keep the old fixture that worked perfectly fine. But I'd bought it anyway because I loved the way the glass shade diffused the light into something warm and golden, casting soft shadows that made the whole house feel like a sanctuary. I'd felt a small thrill of defiance in that purchase, a tiny assertion of my own taste, my own choices. It seems absurd now, how pleased I was with myself over a light fixture, how such a small rebellion felt significant. The stairs. I keep replaying it in my mind, trying to understand the exact sequence of events that led to me lying here, broken and bleeding, while my husband stands calmly above me. I'd been at the top, carrying a basket of towels fresh from the dryer. White towels, the expensive Egyptian cotton ones I'd bought on sale last month after debating with myself for weeks about whether we really needed to spend that kind of money on towels. Richard had said our old towels were fine, but these were so much softer, so much more luxurious. I justified the purchase by reminding myself that we'd had our old towels for almost 8 years, that we deserved nice things occasionally, that I worked hard to keep this house running smoothly and rarely asked for anything extravagant. The towels had arrived in a brown cardboard box, and I'd washed them 3 times to soften them up, adding fabric softener each time, pleased with how fluffy and absorbent they became. I dried them this afternoon, the last load of the day, feeling accomplished that I'd gotten all the laundry done before dinner. I'd been thinking about nothing in particular as I climbed the stairs with that basket. Maybe what to make for dinner. I'd taken chicken breasts out of the freezer that morning, so probably something with chicken. Maybe whether I should call my friend Jennifer back. She'd left a voicemail yesterday that I hadn't returned yet, something about getting coffee and catching up. We hadn't seen each other in weeks, maybe longer. I'd been meaning to call her back, but there was always something that needed doing, and the day would slip away, and before I knew it, it was bedtime and too late to call anyone. I'd stepped forward, my mind on Jennifer's message, on what I'd say when I called her back, how I'd apologize for being out of touch, how I'd suggest next Tuesday for coffee, or maybe Wednesday. And my foot had caught on something. The edge of the runner, maybe. That burgundy carpet runner that had been there since my grandmother owned this house. Secured to each step with those little brass rods and tack strips that I'd checked just last week to make sure everything was tight and safe. Or had it been loose? I couldn't remember clearly now. Everything had happened so fast, and yet in my memory it unfolds in excruciating slow motion. The lurch forward, that sickening moment when I realized I was falling and couldn't stop it. The desperate grab for the railing that came up empty because my hands were full of the basket, my fingers closing on air instead of the smooth oak banister. The towels flying from my hands like startled birds taking flight. The sickening tumble down, down, down. My hip hitting the edge of a step with a crack I felt more than heard, a sound that reverberated through my entire skeleton. my shoulder slamming into the wall, my head bouncing off something, another step, the railing, the floor, I don't know. Just impact after impact after impact as gravity dragged me down 14 stairs. The towels had scattered like white birds taking flight. I'd watched them fall with me, floating in slow motion, landing in pristine folds on the hardwood floor I'd refinished last summer with my own hands. I'd spent 3 weeks on that project, stripping the old finish, sanding down to bare wood, applying new stain in a rich walnut color that brought out the grain patterns. I'd been so proud of how it turned out. I'd stood back and admired my work, thrilled that I'd done it myself instead of hiring contractors. Richard had said I was wasting my time, that we should just pay someone, but I'd enjoyed the physical labor, the transformation of something worn and dull into something beautiful. Now, my blood was probably staining that floor, seeping into the wood grain, ruining all that work. And then stillness. The kind of stillness that comes after violence, after chaos, when the world stops spinning and you're left to assess the damage. The towels lay around me like snow. The house was silent except for my ragged breathing. And pain. Such incredible pain that my vision went white at the edges, then gray, then almost black. Pain that didn't feel like it could exist in a human body, that seemed too enormous to be contained in mere flesh and bone. But I didn't lose consciousness. I desperately wanted to. I wanted the darkness to take me away from the agony screaming through every nerve, to pull me under into oblivion where there was no pain, no fear, no awareness of my shattered body. But my mind stayed stubbornly, cruelly aware, alert, present for every excruciating second. I heard footsteps above me. Slow, measured footsteps. Not running, not panicked, not the sound of someone rushing to help a loved one who'd just fallen down a flight of stairs. Not the frantic scramble I would have expected, the pounding feet of someone desperate to reach me, to help me, to make sure I was alive. Just steady steps descending the staircase, one at a time. Step, pause, step, pause, step. The rhythm of someone who has all the time in the world. Calmly, deliberately, unhurried. Is she breathing? That was Claire's voice. Claire, our nanny. Except we didn't have children. We'd never had children. We'd talked about it in the early years, back when we were newlyweds, and everything seemed possible. We'd discussed names. Emma for a girl, James for a boy. We'd imagined what our children would look like, whether they'd have Richard's dark hair or my lighter shade, his brown eyes or my hazel ones. But it never happened. Month after month, year after year, the pregnancy test came back negative. We saw doctors who ran tests and told us there was no clear reason we weren't conceiving, that sometimes these things just took time. Eventually, we stopped trying, stopped talking about it. The nursery we'd optimistically painted yellow remained an empty room that we called the office, even though no one ever worked in there. Claire had been hired 6 months ago when I'd had surgery on my knee, a minor procedure to repair a torn meniscus from a gardening accident. Nothing serious, but Richard insisted I needed help around the house while I recovered. He'd found Claire through an agency, a referral from someone at his office, though I never learned who. Young, efficient, cheerful, with a bright smile and a can-do attitude that made her easy to be around. She was 26, with dark hair she wore in a ponytail and an athlete's build. She'd mentioned she'd played soccer in college. I'd been grateful for the help at first, genuinely glad to have someone who could vacuum and mop and carry groceries and all the things that were difficult while I was hobbling around on crutches. She'd stayed on after I recovered because Richard said it made sense. The house was large, 3 stories, 4 bedrooms, 2,300 square feet, and I was getting older. 52 wasn't exactly ancient, but it wasn't young either. Why not keep someone on to help with the heavy cleaning and the errands? Why should I exhaust myself scrubbing bathrooms and hauling groceries when we could afford to pay someone to help? It was a kindness, really, Richard had said, a way to make my life easier. I'd agreed because it seemed reasonable, because Richard made it seem reasonable. He was always good at that. at making his desires sound like they were actually for my benefit, at framing his preferences as logical, practical solutions to problems I hadn't necessarily realized I had. Now, I understood why he'd really wanted her to stay. Now, lying broken at the bottom of the stairs, I could see the whole picture with horrible clarity. Looks like it. Richard's voice was flat, emotionless. Not the voice of a man whose wife had just fallen down a flight of stairs. Not the voice of a husband of 15 years watching the woman he'd promised to love and cherish lying broken at the bottom of the staircase. Not the voice of someone who'd held me on our wedding day and promised until death do us part. Just flat, clinical, observational, the voice of someone commenting on the weather or noting that the milk was about to expire. Don't call yet. Don't call? Don't call what? The ambulance? Don't call for help? Don't call 911 to report that your wife has just sustained what is obviously a serious, possibly life-threatening injury? I wanted to scream. I wanted to sit up and demand to know what he meant, what he was saying, why he wasn't calling for help, why he wasn't kneeling beside me checking my pulse, cradling my head, telling me to hold on, that help was coming, that everything would be okay. Why he wasn't doing any of the things a loving husband should do in this moment. But my body wouldn't cooperate. I could barely draw breath. Each inhale felt like knives sliding between my ribs, sharp and cold and unforgiving. My chest ached with the effort of breathing. Everything hurt. My hip was a white-hot center of agony. My shoulder throbbed. My head pounded. I could taste blood in my mouth, copper and salt, and I didn't know if I'd bitten my tongue or if something internal had ruptured. Their footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. I could see their shoes in my peripheral vision if I strained my eyes to the left, which sent a fresh wave of pain through my skull. Richard's expensive Italian loafers, the tan ones I'd bought him for his birthday last year. I'd saved for 2 months to afford them, setting aside $20 here, $30 there from my personal account, the one I kept for my own expenses. I'd wanted to get him something special, something that would make him smile, that would show him how much I loved him and appreciated him. I'd gone to the 3 different stores, comparing styles and prices before finding the perfect pair. I'd had them wrapped in expensive paper with a silk ribbon. I'd watched his face when he opened them, eager for his reaction. He'd thanked me perfunctorily and worn them. Exactly twice before this. The 3rd time was today, to watch me die. In Claire's white sneakers, practical and clean. She always wore white sneakers. Said they were better for her back when she was on her feet all day, that her podiatrist had recommended good arch support, that she'd learned the hard way that cheap shoes led to foot pain and knee pain and all sorts of problems. She was careful about her health, always drinking water from a metal bottle she carried with her, eating salads she brought from home for lunch, going to the gym 3 times a week. She told me all about her fitness routine, and I'd listened with interest, impressed by her discipline. Neither of them knelt down to check on me. Neither of them called out my name. Neither of them touched me to see if I was alive or dead or dying. They just stood there, looking down at me, like I was a piece of furniture that had fallen over. An inconvenience, a problem to be dealt with. Not a person, not a woman they knew, not someone who'd made them meals and paid their salaries and trusted them. We should wait a few minutes, Richard said softly, barely above a whisper. But in the terrible silence of the house, I heard every word with crystalline clarity. Each syllable distinct and sharp. Make sure. Make sure of what? Make sure I was dead? Make sure I wouldn't survive? Make sure whatever they'd planned was working? The thought was so absurd, so impossible, so completely outside the realm of what should be real that my brain rejected it at first. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare. A hallucination brought on by head trauma. Richard was my husband. We'd been married for 15 years. We'd built this life together, this house, this future. We'd weathered arguments and disagreements and the daily friction of sharing a life with another person. We'd had good times and bad times and long stretches of mundane times. We'd been young and hopeful once, hadn't we? We'd been in love, I was sure of it. He'd proposed on a beach at sunset, dropping to one knee in the sand, his hands shaking as he opened the ring box. I'd cried when I said yes. We'd had a wedding with white roses and 200 guests and a 3-tiered cake. We'd honeymooned in Italy, drinking wine in small towns, getting lost in Venice, making love in hotel rooms with the windows open to let in the breeze. We'd said vows, sacred vows, in sickness and in health, for better or worse, till death do us part. In front of God and our families and everyone we loved, we'd made promises. Binding promises, eternal promises. He wouldn't, he couldn't. This isn't real, this isn't happening. But he was. But it was. How long? Claire asked. Her voice was steady, calm, like she was asking how long to cook a roast or how long before the dry cleaning would be ready. Not like she was asking how long to wait before calling for help for a woman who'd just fallen down the stairs. There was no panic in her voice, no horror, no distress at seeing me lying broken and bleeding on the floor. Just curiosity. Logistical planning? Give it 5 minutes. Then you'll call, crying, saying you just found her. I'll be in my study. I didn't hear anything. 5 minutes. They were going to let me lie here for 5 minutes to see if I died on my own. And then they were going to pretend they just discovered me. They were going to call 911 and with fake panic in their voices and report a terrible accident. They were going to cry and wring their hands and play the role of devastated nanny and grieving husband. The ice that flooded my veins was colder than the pain. It spread through my chest, into my stomach, out to my fingertips. A horrible, creeping cold that had nothing to do with shock and everything to do with the sudden, crushing weight of understanding. The terrible clarity that comes when you finally see what's been hidden in plain sight. Richard wanted me dead. Claire wanted me dead. They'd planned this. They'd discussed it. They'd decided together that my life was worth less than whatever they would gain from my death. I tried again to move, to speak, to do anything that would show them I was conscious and aware and understood exactly what they were doing. My left hand twitched against the hardwood floor, my fingers scraping slightly against the smooth wood. That was all I could manage. A pathetic, barely visible twitch. The kind of movement that could easily be mistaken for a post-mortem reflex or a nerve firing its last signal. But it was enough. Look at her hand, Claire said, and I heard something new in her voice now. Nervousness, uncertainty, a tremor of fear. She's moving. Probably just nerves, Richard replied, and his voice was still so calm it made me want to scream. Still so level and collected, as if we were discussing whether rain was likely tomorrow. Spinal reflex or something? I read about it online. He'd read about it, online. He'd researched this. He'd Googled what happens when people die, what kind of movements might occur, what was normal and what wasn't. He'd educated himself on death and dying and how to tell if someone was truly gone or just unconscious. He'd done his homework. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a moment of madness. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment decision. This was planned, calculated, researched, premeditated. He nudged my hip with his foot, not hard but not gently either, like he was checking if I was real or just an object in his way. Like someone might nudge a bag of garbage to see if it was full, or push a box to see if it would move. The movement sent fresh agony through my body, radiating from my shattered hip up through my spine and into my skull like a lightning strike of pure pain. And I couldn't stop the small whimper that escaped my throat. The sound was tiny, barely human, more of a breath than a cry. But it was there, audible, undeniable. She made a sound. Claire took a step back. I could hear it in the shuffle of her sneakers against the hardwood floor I'd refinished last summer, spending hours on my knees with sandpaper and stain, wanting to restore it to the way it had been when my grandmother lived here. When this house was a home full of love instead of whatever it had become. Richard leaned down. I could smell his cologne, that distinctive scent that had become so familiar over 15 years. The same cologne I'd given him last Christmas. Something expensive from a department store, Bleu de Chanel, or one of those other fragrances that came in heavy glass bottles. I'd stood at the counter debating between 3 different options, spritzing them on those little paper strips, trying to decide which one suited him best. I'd chosen this one because the saleswoman said it was sophisticated and masculine and perfect for a professional man. I'd wrapped it carefully in silver paper with a red bow. He'd sprayed it on Christmas morning and kissed me and said it was perfect. Exactly what he'd wanted. He brought his lips close to my ear, so close I could feel the warmth of his breath against my skin. And when he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Intimate. The way he used to whisper when we were first married, when he'd pull me close in bed and tell me he loved me, when everything was new and hopeful, and we thought we had our whole lives ahead of us. Don't call the ambulance yet. The house is finally ours. The words didn't make sense at first. My brain was trying to process too many things at once. The pain that consumed my body, the fear that threatened to drown me, the impossibility of what was happening. The man I'd loved for 15 years standing over me, waiting for me to die so he could take what was mine. But then they clicked into place like puzzle pieces I didn't want to fit together, forming a picture I didn't want to see. Ours, not mine. Ours. Richard and Claire, together. A unit, a partnership. Lovers, probably, though my brain shied away from that image. It was too much on top of everything else. Too much betrayal layered on top of attempted murder. The house was mine. My grandmother had left it to me when she died 10 years ago, shortly after my 42nd birthday. It had been in our family for 3 generations. My grandfather had built it with his own hands in 1952, back when men still did such things, when you could buy a plot of land and some lumber and some tools and build yourself a home over the course of a summer. He'd drawn the plans himself on graph paper, consulting library books about construction and plumbing and electrical work. He'd poured the foundation with help from his brothers. He'd framed the walls and installed the windows and built the staircase. This staircase, step by step. My grandmother had raised my mother here, in this house that smelled of sawdust and fresh paint when they first moved in. And my mother had raised me here until I was 10, and we'd moved across town to a bigger place when my father's business took off. When my grandmother died, she left the house to me with explicit instructions written into the will that it stay in the family, that it never be sold to strangers, that it be passed down to future generations, if there were any, or to my cousin's children if Richard and I never had kids of our own. My grandmother had taken my hand on her deathbed and made me promise. Promise me, Catherine, that you'll keep it in the family. This house has our history in it. Your grandfather's hands built every inch of it. Don't let it go. I'd promised, and I'd meant it. Richard had wanted me to sell it almost immediately after the funeral, said it was too big, too old, too much work. The plumbing was outdated, he'd argued. The electrical system needed rewiring. The roof would need replacing soon. We could sell it for a good price and buy something newer, something that didn't require constant maintenance, something that was ours together instead of a relic from my family. He'd made compelling arguments, used spreadsheets and calculations to show me how much money we'd save with a more modern house. But I'd refused. This house meant something to me. It wasn't just property, it was family. It was history. It was home. It was my connection to my grandmother and grandfather, to my mother, to all the generations that had come before me. It held memories in every room. My grandmother teaching me to knit in the living room. My grandfather showing me how to use his tools in the basement workshop. My mother baking cookies in the kitchen, flour dusting her apron. Christmases and birthdays and ordinary Tuesdays. Laughter and tears and life lived in these rooms. So we'd moved in instead of selling. Richard had been unhappy about it, made his displeasure clear in small ways. Sighs when repairs were needed, complaints about the old windows and the creaky floors. But he'd agreed. eventually, or at least stopped arguing about it. Now I understood why he'd wanted me to sell, why he'd pushed so hard. Because if I was dead, the house would be his. Legally, as my spouse, he'd inherit everything unless I'd explicitly written a will that said otherwise. And I hadn't. I'd been meaning to update our will for years, kept telling myself I'd make an appointment with our lawyer, but life got busy and it kept slipping down the list of priorities. So under our existing will, everything went to Richard if I died. The house, my savings, my retirement accounts, my grandmother's jewelry, everything. He could sell it, could take the money, and in this market, the house was worth at least $800,000, maybe more, and disappear and do whatever he wanted. With Claire. "It's about time," Claire said, and when I managed to roll my eyes slightly to the left, straining against the pain and the limited mobility, fighting against the way my vision swam and blurred, I saw her clearly for the first time since the fall. She was smiling. Not a cruel smile. Not an evil grin like a villain in a movie. Not a sneer or a smirk. Just a simple, satisfied smile. Like someone who'd been waiting in a long line and had finally reached the counter. Like someone who'd been patient for a long time and was now getting their reward. Like someone who'd worked hard for something and was finally seeing results. Relief. That's what her smile was. Pure relief. The smile of someone who'd been holding their breath and could finally exhale. They'd planned this. Not just Richard, both of them. Together. How long had they been plotting? Weeks? Months? Had they been lying in bed together? My bed? Another bed? Discussing the best way to kill me? Debating methods? Ruling out options that were too obvious or too risky? Landing on this one because a fall down the stairs looked accidental, especially for a woman my age who might be expected to trip occasionally. The realization hit me harder than the fall, crushed me more completely than the impact with the hardwood floor. This was betrayal on a scale I couldn't comprehend. My husband, who'd promised to love me. Our nanny, who I'd welcomed into my home, paid generously, trusted with access to every part of my life. Both of them working together to end my life so they could have what I had. Richard wanted me dead. Claire wanted me dead. They'd loosened the carpet runner. They'd waited for the right moment when I'd be carrying something and my hands would be full and I couldn't catch myself. They'd planned every detail, thought through every angle. This wasn't an accident. This was murder. Attempted murder, technically, since I wasn't dead yet. But that was just a technicality they were hoping to remedy in the next few minutes. Because I wasn't dead. Not yet. Not quite. I tried to speak. Tried to force words past the blood I could taste in my throat, tried to call for help or scream or do anything that might bring a neighbor running. But only a gurgling sound came out, wet and horrible and wrong. The sound of someone drowning on dry land. Blood, I realized dimly. There was blood in my throat, from the fall or from biting my tongue or from something internal rupturing. I didn't know. But I could taste copper and salt and my own mortality. "We should still wait," Richard said, straightening up. He adjusted his shirt collar, a casual gesture that was so normal, so everyday, so completely inappropriate for the situation that it made me dizzy with disbelief. Head injuries are tricky. She could still... The doorbell rang. The sound was loud and jarring and beautiful. The most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. The sound of hope, of rescue, of salvation. Both of them froze. I felt rather than saw it. The sudden tension in the air, like a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. The sharp intake of breath from Claire. The way Richard's foot pulled back from where it had been resting against my side. "Who the hell is that?" Richard hissed. And now there was emotion in his voice. Anger, fear, panic. The carefully controlled mask slipping to reveal what was underneath. The doorbell rang again, followed by heavy, insistent knocking. Not a friendly tap, but a pounding fist. The kind of knocking that said, "This is urgent, this is important, this is official, open the door now." Paramedics, we got an automated alert from a fall detection device. Open up. Fall detection device. My watch. I'd bought one of those smartwatches last month, one of the latest models with all the health tracking features. The kind that tracked steps and heart rate and sleep patterns and sent notifications about standing up more and drinking water and taking deep breaths. Jennifer had recommended it, said it had helped her get more active, that she'd lost 10 pounds just by paying more attention to her daily movement. I'd bought one on a whim during a sale, partly because Jennifer was so enthusiastic about it and partly because I thought it might motivate me to exercise more. Richard had mocked me for it when it arrived, said I was being paranoid, that I didn't need a watch to tell me to move around, that it was a waste of money, and I was falling for clever marketing, that I'd worn regular watches my whole life and didn't need something that buzzed at me all day long. I'd felt silly after his comments, almost returned it, but then decided I'd keep it anyway. It was my money, my decision. Another small act of defiance. The watch could detect falls. I'd read about it in the manual, but hadn't thought much about it. It was one of many features: temperature tracking, irregular heart rhythm notifications, noise level monitoring, fall detection. If the watch detected a hard fall and the wearer didn't respond within 60 seconds, it would automatically call emergency services and provide GPS coordinates. I'd never been so grateful for modern technology in my entire life. Never been so thankful for a purchase Richard had called foolish. That watch, that silly, unnecessary, expensive watch, had just saved my life. Shit, Claire whispered, and the words sounded harsh and ugly in her usually sweet voice. The voice she used to offer me tea, or tell me she'd finished the laundry, or ask if I needed anything from the store. Answer it, Richard said, and his voice shifted so quickly it was like watching an actor step into character, like a switch being flipped. The flatness, the coldness, the calculation, all of it disappeared in an instant, replaced by something worried and frantic and husband-like. Concern creased his brow. Fear widened his eyes. His whole body language changed, shoulders slumping forward, hands already reaching toward me, as if he'd been about to help all along. Answer it and bring them in. Act normal. She just fell. We just found her. Remember that. Stay calm. Follow my lead. Normal. As if any of this was normal. As if standing over your wife, debating whether to let her die was normal. As if waiting 5 minutes to see if she'd expire was normal. As if planning her murder was normal. I heard Claire's footsteps hurry across the hardwood floor, through the foyer to the front door, the creak of hinges that needed oiling. I'd been meaning to fix that for weeks, had even bought WD-40 from the hardware store, but it was still sitting in the garage, unopened. One more item on an endless list of household tasks that never got done. Her voice, higher now, laced with false panic that might have sounded real if I didn't know better. If I hadn't heard her calm, calculating tone just moments ago. Oh, thank God you're here. I just found her. She fell down the stairs. Please help her. I don't know what to do. There's so much blood. Just found her. As if she and Richard hadn't been standing over me for the past 3 or 4 minutes, debating whether to let me die. As if Claire herself hadn't loosened the carpet runner that caused this fall. Heavy footsteps rushed into the foyer. 2 pairs. Boots on my clean floors. I would have cared about that once. Would have worried about scuff marks and dirt being tracked through the house. Now I just prayed they could save me. Prayed they were real and competent and would see through whatever story Richard had prepared. Ma'am, can you hear me? A man's voice, deep and calm and professional. The kind of voice trained to stay steady in emergencies, to provide reassurance when everything is chaos. My name is Jake. You've had a fall. We're going to help you. You're safe now. Safe. The word sounded foreign, impossible. A concept from another world where husbands didn't try to murder their wives for houses. Hands on me. Not Richard's hands, not Claire's hands. Different hands. Careful, professional hands checking my pulse at my wrist, at my neck. The hands were warm and sure, touching me with practiced efficiency. Fingers gently probing my scalp, checking for injury. A bright light shining in my eyes. First one, then the other. Checking pupil response. I tried to respond, to say something, to tell him what happened, to explain that this wasn't an accident, that Richard and Claire tried to kill me, that I wasn't safe, that I'd never be safe as long as they were free to try again. But all I could do was stare up at him with wide, terrified eyes that I hoped conveyed even a fraction of what I needed him to understand. He was young, maybe early 30s, with short dark hair and kind eyes behind the lenses of protective glasses. The kind of eyes that had seen terrible things, but still cared, still tried, still believed that people were worth saving. "She's conscious," Jake said to someone I couldn't see. His partner, probably. Pupils responsive but unequal. Possible head trauma. Definite skeletal injuries. "I'm seeing deformity in the left hip and shoulder. Get the collar and board. Call it in. We need immediate transport. Trauma alert. Is she going to be okay?" Richard asked, and his voice was perfect. Absolutely perfect. Concerned. Loving. Terrified. The voice of a devoted husband watching his wife suffer. If I didn't know better, if I hadn't heard what he'd said 30 seconds before the doorbell rang, I would have believed him completely. I would have thought he was a wonderful man, a caring partner, desperate for his wife to survive. But I knew better now, and I would never not know again. "We need to stabilize her before we can assess the full extent of injuries," Jake said, not looking up from me. His hands were gentle but firm as they moved over my body, checking my neck, my spine, my limbs with practiced efficiency. Every touch sent waves of pain through me, but I welcomed it because it meant someone was helping. Someone who didn't want me dead was touching me with the intent to save rather than to harm. Someone was trying to save me instead of waiting for me to die. "Sir, I need you to step back and give us room to work," Jake said firmly, still not looking at Richard. There was something in his tone that sounded less like a request and more like a command. Of course, of course. Richard moved away, but not far. I could still see him in my peripheral vision, hovering close, watching, making sure I didn't say anything I shouldn't, making sure his secret stayed safe. The female paramedic, I couldn't see her clearly, just a blur of movement and a dark blue uniform and dark skin and braided hair pulled back in a bun, returned with equipment, a large bag, a backboard, what looked like a cervical collar. They worked in synchronized silence, clearly a team that had done this hundreds of times, moving with practiced efficiency born of experience. "I'm Amy," the woman said, her voice low and soothing. "We're going to take good care of you." They carefully secured a cervical collar around my neck, their movements slow and deliberate. Every movement was agony. The collar pressed against bruises I didn't know I had. The straps securing me to the board pulled against ribs I was now certain were broken. My body screamed in protest as they moved me, even though they were being as gentle as possible. But I didn't make a sound beyond small whimpers I couldn't control. My throat was full of blood and fear and words I couldn't speak. "Sir, did you see what happened?" Amy asked as they continued to work, her hands busy securing straps while Jake monitored my vitals. Her voice was brisk, professional. All business. The kind of person who gets things done without drama. "No, I was in my study," Richard said smoothly, the lie rolling off his tongue like honey, like he'd practiced it, like he'd rehearsed exactly what to say if this moment came. "I had my headphones on. I was on a conference call with clients in Singapore. Time zones make it complicated. Claire found her. Claire, tell them what you saw." Of course, Richard was in his study. Of course, he had an alibi prepared. Of course, he'd thought of everything, covered every angle, prepared for every contingency. "I was in the kitchen," Claire said, and if I hadn't known the truth, I would have believed the tremor in her voice was genuine. She sounded young and scared and traumatized. "I heard a crash and came running. She was just lying here, like this. I didn't move her. I know you're not supposed to move someone who's fallen. I took a first aid class once. I called out to Richard, but he didn't hear me. His office door was closed and he had his headphones on. So I was about to call 911, but then I heard the doorbell, and you were already here? More lies. Perfect, practice lies. They'd coordinated their story, probably rehearsed it multiple times, making sure the details aligned, that there were no contradictions. The patient's smartwatch called it in automatically, Jake said, adjusting the collar around my neck with careful fingers. Fall detection alert. That's why we got here so fast. Thank God for that watch, Richard said. I told her it was a good idea to get it. You never know when these things will happen. The lie was so blatant, so opposite of what he'd actually said, that I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Could only lie there while he rewrote history in real time. Jake was leaning close to me again, his pen light shining in my eyes. Ma'am, if you can hear me and understand me, I need you to try to squeeze my hand. Can you do that for me? He slipped his hand into mine. His skin was warm, calloused, real. The hand of someone who worked with his hands, who helped people, who saved lives instead of ending them. This was it. This was my chance. If I could squeeze his hand, if I could show him I was conscious and aware, then maybe he'd understand something was wrong. Maybe he'd ask the right questions. Maybe he'd see through Richard's performance and Claire's fake tears. I had to make them understand, had to communicate somehow that this wasn't an accident, that I was in danger, that the people telling lies were standing right here in the room. I focused every ounce of energy I had into my right hand, into my fingers that felt like they were made of lead, of concrete, of something heavy and unresponsive and useless. Move. Please move. Please. For the love of God, move. I squeezed. It was weak. It was barely anything. The flutter of a butterfly's wing, the whisper of a thought, but it was there, deliberate, intentional. Jake's eyes widened slightly. Good, he said softly, and his voice was warm, encouraging, kind. You're doing great. That's excellent. Can you do that again for me? I squeezed again. Stronger this time, more certain, putting everything I had into that simple gesture. She's responsive to commands, Jake called to Amy. Good motor function in the right hand. Then he looked up, past me, and his expression changed. The warmth disappeared. His jaw tightened. His eyes hardened into something cold and assessing. He was looking at Richard. Sir, I need you to step back. Now. There was steel in Jake's voice now. Authority. The voice of someone who wouldn't be argued with. I just want to be close to my wife, Richard said, and I could hear the edge in his voice, the barely controlled anger, the panic underneath the performance. He didn't want Jake talking to me, didn't want me communicating with anyone, didn't want his carefully constructed narrative challenged. She squeezed my hand, Jake said, standing up slowly. He was tall, I realized. Taller than Richard by several inches, broader across the shoulders. He positioned himself between Richard and me, and I understood with sudden clarity that he was protecting me. That somehow, some way, he sensed that something wasn't right here. And she can hear every word you say. So I suggest you step back and let us do our job. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with tension and unspoken accusations. I wished I could see Richard's face. Wished I could see the panic, the calculation, the fear. Wished I could see him realize that his perfect plan was unraveling. Of course, Richard finally said, and his voice was tight, controlled. Whatever she needs, I'm sorry, I'm scared. I love her so much. She's everything to me. Lies. All lies. Every word from his mouth was poison disguised as concern. We understand, sir, Amy said, her tone professional but firm. But we need space to work. Please wait in the other room. We'll let you know when we're ready to transport. I heard Richard's footsteps move away, reluctant, slow, the sound of someone being forced to retreat when they wanted to stay and control the situation. But he went. And in that moment, I felt the smallest spark of hope. Jake knelt beside me again, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, meant only for me. Private in a room that suddenly felt too public. You're safe now. We've got you. And I'm documenting everything. Everything I heard, everything I saw. You understand? Tears leaked from the corners of my eyes. Not from pain, though there was plenty of that. Not from fear, though I was terrified. From relief. From the crushing weight of betrayal. From the sudden, overwhelming understanding that my husband had tried to kill me, and I'd heard every word, and now someone else had heard it too. From the knowledge that I wasn't crazy, wasn't imagining things, wasn't confused from head trauma. Someone else knew. Someone else had seen through the lies. They lifted me onto the backboard, Amy counting to 3 before they moved in synchronized precision. Even with their care, even with their gentleness, the movement was excruciating. White-hot pain exploded in my hip, my ribs, my shoulder. I must have made a sound, more than a whimper, almost a scream, because Jake's hand found mine again. I know it hurts. I'm sorry. We need to move you carefully because of your spine. We'll get you something for the pain as soon as we're in the ambulance. I promise. They carried me out of the house I'd loved. Past the foyer with the mirror my grandmother had hung in 1955. An ornate, gold-framed thing she'd found at an estate sale. Past the living room with the fireplace my grandfather had built by hand, stone by stone, the mantel carved from a single piece of oak. Past the kitchen where I'd learned to make my mother's recipes, where I'd spent countless hours cooking meals that Richard barely acknowledged. Past the life I'd thought I had. The sunlight was painfully bright after the dimness of the house. I squinted against it, disoriented. It was still afternoon, still the same day, still the same world. But everything had changed. Everything. The ambulance was white and impossibly large, parked in my driveway with its lights still flashing red and blue. Neighbors were starting to emerge from their houses, curious about the commotion. Mrs. Chen from next door stood on her porch, one hand shading her eyes. The Kowalskis from across the street had come out to their front lawn. I could see phones being raised, pictures being taken. The modern instinct to document every drama. They loaded me inside with practiced efficiency. Jake climbed in with me. Amy took the driver's seat, her hands already on the radio, calling ahead to the hospital. I'm going to start an IV, Jake said, already moving, pulling equipment from cabinets. Get some pain medication on board. You're going to start feeling better soon. I promise. Richard appeared at the ambulance doors, trying to climb in, his face a mask of concern that I now recognized as performance art. Sorry, sir, Amy said from the front, firm and unyielding. Family can follow in their own vehicle. We don't have room and we need to work. But she's my wife. Hospital is 10 minutes away. We'll see you there. We need to go now. She closed the doors in his face with a definitive clang that sounded like victory. The ambulance started moving, sirens wailing. Jake worked quickly, inserting an IV into my arm with practiced ease, hanging bags of fluid, pushing medication through the line that turned the world soft and fuzzy around the edges. The pain began to recede, not gone, but dulled, manageable. My thoughts began to swim. Can you tell me your name? Jake asked as he worked, his hands busy, but his attention fully on me. I tried to speak. My throat was raw, and my tongue felt thick. But I managed to croak out, Catherine Patterson. Okay, Catherine, I'm Jake. You're going to be okay. Do you remember what happened? I wanted to tell him everything. About the carpet runner that had been fine yesterday and loose today. About Richard's whisper. About Claire's smile. About how they'd stood over me and waited for me to die. But the words wouldn't come fast enough. The medication was pulling me under, and my thoughts were getting tangled and confused. Fell, I managed. Stairs. Do you remember how you fell? Did you trip on something? Yes. Yes, I tripped because Claire loosened the runner. Because they planned this. Because they want me dead. Because they want my house and my money and me gone. But all I could say was, runner, carpet. My tongue was so thick, the words so hard to form. Jake nodded, making notes on a tablet. The carpet runner was loose? I tried to nod, but the cervical collar prevented it. Yes. The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Had it been loose before? Had you noticed it? No, it had been fine yesterday. Fine this morning. Fine every day until today, when Claire made it loose so I would fall. But I couldn't explain. The medication was too strong. My thoughts were scattering like those white towels falling through the air, beautiful and untethered and impossible to catch. We'll figure it out, Jake said gently, seeing my struggle. You just rest. We're almost there. I wanted to stay awake, wanted to stay alert, but the darkness was pulling at me, soft and insistent, and I was so tired of hurting, so tired of being afraid. I let the darkness take me, trusting that Jake would keep me safe, that the hospital would protect me, that somehow this nightmare would end with me alive, instead of dead in a casket, while Richard played the grieving widower and sold my grandmother's house to developers who'd tear it down and build condos. When I woke, I was in a hospital room surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed and monitored every function of my broken body. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and clinical. The air smelled like antiseptic and floor wax, and something else I couldn't identify. Illness, maybe. Or just the generic smell of medical facilities. Pain. I could identify pain. It was everywhere. A dull, throbbing ache in my hip that pulsed with my heartbeat. Sharp, stabbing sensations in my ribs with every breath, no matter how shallow I tried to make them. A pounding headache that made the lights seem too bright, and the sounds too loud, every beep from the machines like a hammer against my skull. I tried to move and immediately regretted it. My body felt like it had been disassembled and reassembled incorrectly. Everything in the wrong place, nothing working quite right. Easy. A woman's voice, kind but firm, professional. You're in the ICU at Memorial Hospital. You were in a serious accident. Try not to move. I turned my head carefully, fighting the cervical collar that still restricted my movement, and saw a nurse. Middle-aged, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a ponytail and tired eyes that had seen too many broken people. She wore blue scrubs with cartoon characters on them. Disney princesses, I thought, though my vision was still blurry. What? My voice was a rasp, barely recognizable as my own, like someone had taken sandpaper to my vocal cords. What happened? You fell down the stairs at your home. Do you remember? I remembered everything, every terrible second. The feeling of falling, the impact, the pain. Richard's voice, Claire's smile, the waiting, the cold calculation, the plan to let me die. Yes. Good. That's a good sign. Memory intact is always positive with head injuries. You have a concussion, but you don't seem to have any significant memory loss. The doctor will be pleased. She checked one of the monitors, made a note on a chart she pulled from a holder at the end of my bed. You have 2 fractured ribs, a severely dislocated shoulder that we've relocated under sedation, and a shattered hip. The orthopedic surgeon wants to operate, but we're waiting for the swelling to go down first. Probably another 2 weeks before you're stable enough for that level of surgery. Surgery, months of recovery, physical therapy, vulnerability, if I live that long, if Richard didn't find another way. Your husband is outside, the nurse continued, completely unaware of the terror her words inspired. He's been here since they brought you in. He's been very worried. Would you like me to let him in? No. God, no. Please, no. But I couldn't say that. Couldn't explain why the thought of seeing Richard filled me with terror so visceral I could taste it. Couldn't articulate that my husband had tried to kill me without sounding paranoid or crazy or confused from head trauma. All the things Richard had probably already told them I was. Tired, I managed. So tired. Of course you are. Major trauma takes a toll. But let me give him just a minute to see you're okay. He's been beside himself. Then I'll send him away so you can rest. She left before I could protest, before I could find the words to make her understand that the last person I wanted to see was my husband. Richard entered moments later, his face carefully arranged into an expression of concern. He'd changed clothes, not the casual slacks and button-down he'd been wearing at home, but nicer pants and a sweater that made him look responsible and caring. He rushed to my bedside, reaching for my hand with the IV in it. I pulled it away, or tried to. The movement was small, weak, limited by the tubes and wires connecting me to various machines. But it was there. He noticed. Of course he noticed. I saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Calculation, assessment, concern that I might remember more than he wanted me to. "Catherine, sweetheart, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice pitched perfectly for an audience. The nurse who was still fussing with my IV. The doctor I could see through the glass partition, talking to another patient, anyone who might be listening. I should have fixed that carpet runner months ago. I should have noticed it was loose. This is all my fault. I'm so sorry. The lie was so smooth, so perfect, delivered with such apparent sincerity that if I didn't know better, I would have believed him. I would have thought he was a good man racked with guilt over a preventable accident. "It's okay," I whispered, playing along. Because what else could I do? Accident. Relief flickered across his face. Quick, barely there. But I saw it. Saw him exhale the breath he'd been holding. Saw the tension leave his shoulders. He thought I didn't remember. Thought I didn't know what he'd said, what he'd done, what he'd planned. Good. Let him think that. Let him believe he'd gotten away with it. Let him think I was confused, that the head injury had scrambled my memories, that I'd bought his story about being in his study with headphones on. Because if he thought I was a threat, he'd try again. And next time, he might succeed. Next time, there might not be a smart watch to call for help. Next time, I might actually die. I needed time. Time to heal. Time to think. Time to figure out how to prove what he'd done. "The doctor says you're going to be okay," Richard said, sitting down in the chair beside my bed, settling in like he planned to stay. "It'll be a long recovery, but you're going to be fine. We'll get through this together." We. As if we were a team. As if he hadn't just tried to kill me. "Claire?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Testing. Wanting to see his reaction. "She's at home, cleaning up from the accident. The EMTs made quite a mess with all their equipment. She was so upset when she found you, Catherine. She feels terrible. She's been texting me every hour asking how you are." More lies. Such elaborate, detailed lies. "Need to rest," I said, closing my eyes, shutting him out. "So tired." "Of course. I'll let you sleep. I'll be right here if you need anything. I'm not going anywhere." That's what I was afraid of. But I couldn't say that. Not yet. So I pretended to sleep while Richard sat beside me, scrolling through his phone with that barely audible clicking sound his screen made when he typed. Probably texting Claire. Probably planning their next move. Probably reassuring her that everything was fine, that I didn't remember, that they were safe. And I thought about how to survive, how to prove what they'd done, how to make sure that when I accused them, because I would accuse them, people would believe me instead of writing me off as a confused woman with a head injury and a vivid imagination. The next few days passed in a haze of pain and medication and carefully managed visits. The hospital routine became familiar. Nurses checking vitals every few hours. Doctors making rounds. Meals that arrived on plastic trays and tasted like cardboard. Physical therapists who made me practice simple movements, testing my range of motion, assessing what I'd be able to do once I left the hospital. Richard came every day, playing the devoted husband for an audience of medical staff and other visitors. He brought flowers that made me sneeze. Lilies, which I told him years ago I was allergic to, but he'd apparently forgotten or never cared enough to remember. He brought magazines I would never read. Fashion magazines full of 20-year-old models wearing clothes I couldn't afford and wouldn't wear even if I could. He sat beside my bed and talked about nothing. The weather, which was getting colder as October moved toward November. The neighbors, who'd all asked about me. What was on television, shows I'd never watched and had no interest in. He never mentioned the fall. Never asked if I remembered anything specific. Never showed a hint of the man who'd stood over me and waited for me to die. The performance was flawless. If I didn't know the truth, I'd think he was the perfect husband. Attentive, concerned, devoted. Claire didn't visit. Richard said she was too traumatized by finding me. That she couldn't bear to see me in the hospital. That it brought back terrible memories of her own mother's illness. I'd never heard Claire mention her mother being ill, but maybe I'd forgotten. Or maybe it was just another lie in an ocean of lies. I thought it was more likely that she couldn't bear to face me, couldn't look me in the eye knowing what she'd done. Guilt, maybe, or fear that I'd somehow see the truth in her face. Jake, the paramedic, visited once. He came during his shift change, still in his uniform, that dark blue that emergency responders wear. He knocked softly on my door and waited for permission before entering. "I wanted to check on you," he said, standing at the foot of my bed. "Make sure you're doing okay. I try to follow up on my patients when I can." "Better," I said. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. The pain was more manageable now with the medication. I could think more clearly without the fog of shock and trauma clouding everything. "Thank you for helping me. That's my job." He glanced around, checking we were alone. The curtain around my bed was drawn for privacy. Richard had left half an hour ago to get dinner. "Do you remember the fall? Sometimes head injuries can cause memory issues." This was it. The moment I had to decide whether to trust this stranger with the truth. "I remember everything," I said quietly, meeting his eyes. Jake's expression shifted. Understanding dawned. "Everything?" I looked at him, this stranger who'd saved my life, and made a decision. A gamble. A leap of faith based on nothing but the kindness I'd seen in his eyes and the way he'd protected me from Richard. I remember my husband standing over me with Claire. I remember them not calling for help. I remember them waiting. I remember what he whispered to me. Jake sat down slowly in the chair Richard had vacated, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. What did he say? I took a breath, feeling the pain in my ribs from the expansion of my lungs, and told him. He said, "Don't call the ambulance yet. The house is finally ours." And Claire said, "It's about time." Jake's jaw tightened, muscles jumping under his skin. That's what I heard when I arrived, when I was at the door. But when I put it in my report, my supervisor said I must have misheard, that people don't say things like that, that I was probably confused by the stress of the situation. But you didn't mishear. No, I didn't. I heard your husband whisper something to you just before we knocked. I couldn't make out the words, but his body language was wrong. And the way they both reacted when we arrived, they weren't surprised or relieved. They were panicked, angry almost. What do I do? The question came out smaller than I intended, more desperate. I hated the vulnerability in my voice, but I didn't know how to make it stronger. He'll try again. I know he will. And next time, I might not be lucky enough to have a smart watch call for help. Have you talked to the police? A detective came yesterday. Detective Morris. I tried to tell him what happened, what I heard. Richard told him I'd been drinking that day, that I'd been struggling with alcohol for months, that he'd been worried about me. The detective seemed to believe him more than me. I could still see the skepticism in Detective Morris's eyes as I tried to explain. The way he'd made notes that felt more like he was humoring me than actually investigating. The way he'd looked at Richard with sympathy. One man to another, dealing with a difficult wife. Jake nodded slowly. Your husband is building a narrative, making you seem unreliable so anything you say gets dismissed. It's a classic abuse tactic. I know, but I don't know how to fight that. He's always been good at this, at making people see things his way, at controlling how situations are perceived. Evidence, Jake said firmly. You need evidence. Do you have security cameras? I do, actually. Hope flickered in my chest, small and tentative. A smart home system. 4 cameras, front entrance, backyard, living room, and the staircase. I can access the cameras from my phone. Where's your phone? Richard took it. Of course he had. He said I should rest, not stress myself with calls and messages, that I needed to focus on healing. Of course he did. Of course he'd made sure I had no access to the outside world, no way to contact people or check the cameras or do anything he couldn't monitor. Jake pulled out his own phone. What's the app? I can download it. You can use my phone to check the footage. If it's still there. If it's still there. That was the question. Had Richard been smart enough to delete the footage? Or had he not realized the cameras would have captured everything? I told him the app name, The login information I'd memorized when I set up the system 6 months ago. Richard had said security cameras were paranoid and unnecessary in our safe neighborhood, but I'd installed them anyway after there'd been a string of break-ins on the next street over. Jake downloaded it, handed me the phone. The app loaded slowly, the spinning circle making me anxious. Then the camera feeds appeared, 4 squares showing different areas of my house in real time. Living room, empty. Furniture exactly where I'd left it. Kitchen, clean counters, morning sunlight through the window. Front entrance, the door closed. Welcome mat slightly askew. Backyard, my garden, leaves starting to fall from the trees. And the staircase, empty now, but what had it seen 3 days ago? I scrolled back with trembling fingers to the day of the fall. 2:30 p.m. The camera showed the staircase, empty and normal. The carpet runner secure, properly tacked down, safe. I'd walked up and down those stairs a dozen times that morning and never noticed anything wrong. 2:40 p.m. Claire appeared, coming up from the basement door with a basket of laundry. My laundry. I could see my blue sweater folded on top. She set the basket down at the top of the stairs and looked around carefully. Left, right, behind her, checking if anyone was watching, making sure she was alone. Then she knelt down and deliberately loosened the carpet runner. Her fingers worked at the tack strips I'd installed last year, prying them up, creating a gap. She pulled the runner away from the top step, leaving a loose flap that would easily catch a foot, my foot. The footage was clear. High definition. There was no mistaking what she was doing. This was deliberate, calculated, premeditated. She stood, picked up the laundry basket, and disappeared into the hallway toward the bedrooms. 2:47 p.m. I appeared at the top of the stairs, carrying my basket of white towels. I could see myself checking my phone, probably looking at the time, thinking about starting dinner prep. I took a step forward, my foot caught the loosened runner exactly as planned, and I fell. The camera captured everything in horrible, high-definition detail. My body tumbling down the stairs, limbs flailing, the basket flying from my hands, towels scattering like snow. The sickening impacts as I hit each step. The final, brutal landing at the bottom, my body twisted at wrong angles. At 2:48 p.m., Richard emerged from his study. Not rushed, not panicked. He didn't run. He walked to the top of the stairs, looked down at me lying broken at the bottom, then looked down the hallway where Claire had gone, checking to make sure phase 1 was complete. She appeared a moment later. They had a brief conversation I couldn't hear, no audio on the cameras, and then they both slowly descended the stairs together. Their body language was casual, unhurried. They could have been going downstairs to get a snack. They stood over me for 2 minutes and 47 seconds. I watched the timestamp count every second while they debated my fate. I could see their lips moving, animated discussions. Could see Richard lean down to whisper in my ear. That moment was captured from above. His head bent close to mine, his lips moving with words I knew by heart now. Could see them both startle when the doorbell rang. Could see the panic transform their faces. Could see Richard straighten up and visibly compose himself, squaring his shoulders, arranging his expression into concern before Jake and Amy entered the frame. The transformation was remarkable. Within seconds, he went from calm and calculating to frantic and worried. If I hadn't just watched the preceding minutes, I would have believed his performance completely. "Oh my God," Jake breathed, watching over my shoulder. "This is attempted murder, clear as day. This isn't even questionable. She loosened the runner, they waited to make sure you'd die. They planned to pretend they just found you." Yes. My voice was steady, despite the shaking in my hands, despite the nausea churning in my stomach. But who's going to believe me? Richard will say I edited the footage, that I'm vindictive because he wants a divorce, that I'm trying to avoid blame for my own fall, that I'm unstable. The footage has a timestamp, a digital signature. Modern security systems are designed to prevent tampering. It can be verified by digital forensics experts. By who? Richard's already convinced the police I'm unstable. He's convinced the doctor I have a drinking problem even though I barely drink. He's already controlling the narrative. Let me take screenshots, Jake said, his fingers already moving across his phone. Send them to myself and to my sister. She's a nurse here in the ICU. She works the night shift. Maybe she can help. Can make sure the staff knows to watch for anything suspicious. How will screenshots help? Evidence. Multiple copies in multiple places. Even if your husband manages to delete the footage from your account, even if he destroys your phone, we'll still have proof. And I can testify about what I heard, what I saw. My partner Amy heard it too. We both put it in our reports, even if my supervisor dismissed it. Hope, real hope, not just the fragile, wishful thinking I'd been nursing, began to grow in my chest. Jake quickly took photos of the most damning moments. Claire loosening the runner, her movements deliberate and careful. Richard's calm emergence from his study. His casual walk to the stairs. The two of them standing over me, waiting, checking their watches. The moment Richard leaned down to whisper. Evidence. Proof. Documentation that this hadn't been an accident, but an attempted murder. But was it enough? Would anyone believe me? Or would Richard's carefully constructed narrative, confused wife, head injury, alcohol problem, vindictive spouse, override the truth I could show them? Thank you, I said, handing him back his phone, for believing me. Most people don't. Even when I tell them what happened, I can see the doubt in their eyes. I knew something was wrong from the moment I arrived, Jake said, pocketing his phone. The way your husband acted, the way Claire acted. It didn't feel right. I've been a paramedic for 8 years. You develop instincts about these things. And when I heard what he whispered to you, right before we knocked, I knew it was more than just a tragic accident. He stood to leave, checking his watch. My shift starts in 20 minutes. I need to go. But Catherine, Mrs. Patterson, be careful. If your husband did this once, if he planned this, he might try again. Especially now that you survived. I know. Don't eat or drink anything he brings you unless it's sealed from the hospital cafeteria or a restaurant. Don't take any medication unless the nurse gives it to you directly from the hospital pharmacy. And keep pretending you don't remember clearly. Keep him thinking he's safe, that his plan worked, that you don't suspect anything. I nodded, storing the advice away like weapons for a battle I was already fighting but hadn't fully acknowledged yet. And one more thing, Jake said from the doorway, his voice low and serious. Consider calling a lawyer, not just for the criminal side, the police, but for the civil side. Your assets, your house, your will. Make sure everything is protected. If something happens to you, make sure your husband doesn't benefit. After Jake left, I lay in my hospital bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about 15 years of marriage. 15 years of loving a man who'd tried to kill me for a house, for money, for freedom to be with someone else. How had I missed the signs? When had Richard stopped loving me and started seeing me as an obstacle? Had there been moments I could have prevented this? Choices I could have made differently? Should I have seen this coming? Or had he always been this person, and I'd just been too trusting to see it? Had he married me, knowing even then that my grandmother would leave me this house? Had the whole relationship been a long con? The questions circled endlessly, unanswerable and painful. What mattered now wasn't the past. It was survival. Richard wanted me dead so he could have my house and my money and his freedom to be with Claire. I needed to make sure he failed. And more than that, I needed to make sure he paid for what he tried to do. Not just for my sake, but so he couldn't do this to someone else. So Claire couldn't do this to someone else. The hospital discharged me a week later, 7 days after the fall, with a walker and strict instructions for physical therapy and pain management. My hip would need surgery, but the orthopedic surgeon wanted to wait another 2 weeks for the swelling and bruising to improve, for my body to stabilize, for the risk of complications to decrease. 2 weeks of being vulnerable, of being slow and weak and dependent. 2 weeks of being alone with Richard in the house where he'd tried to kill me. I tried to argue with the social worker who came to discuss my discharge plan, a tired-looking woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a clipboard full of forms. "Isn't there a rehabilitation facility I could go to?" I'd asked, trying not to sound as desperate as I felt. "Somewhere with medical staff on site? I'd feel safer with professional help available." "Your insurance won't cover it for this type of injury," she'd explained sympathetically, probably having this conversation a dozen times a day with patients who didn't want to go home. "You don't need skilled nursing care. You're stable. Your vitals are good. You're not at risk for immediate complications. You just need assistance with daily activities. Your husband has assured us he'll be able to provide that care. He seems very committed to your recovery." Of course he had. Of course he'd presented himself as the devoted husband ready to care for his injured wife. The social worker had probably found him charming, trustworthy, responsible. "What about staying with a friend?" I'd asked. "I have friends who might be willing to help." "Do you have a friend who could provide round-the-clock care? Someone who can help you to the bathroom multiple times a day, assist with bathing, medication management, meal preparation, physical therapy exercises, someone who's available essentially 24/7 for the next 2 weeks?" I thought of Jennifer. Sweet, well-meaning Jennifer, who'd been my closest friend before Richard had slowly edged her out of my life. She worked full-time as an accountant, long hours during tax season. She had 3 kids ranging from 8 to 15. She had a husband who traveled for work. She had a life that was already overfull. I couldn't ask her to take care of me. Couldn't explain why I was terrified to go home with my own husband without sounding paranoid or crazy or like exactly the unstable person Richard had told everyone I was. "No," I'd admitted, and my voice small. "I don't." "Then home with your husband is really your best option. He seems very caring and committed to your recovery. You're lucky to have him." Lucky. If only she knew. So I went home. Because I had no choice. Because the hospital needed the bed. Because insurance wouldn't pay for alternatives. Because Richard had successfully isolated me to the point where I had no one who could drop everything to care for me for 2 weeks. Richard pulled the car up to the hospital entrance while a nurse wheeled me out in a wheelchair. One of the younger nurses who'd been particularly kind during my stay. The day was bright and cold. Early October sunshine filtering through trees, just starting to turn gold and red and orange. The world was putting on its autumn show. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like a countdown. A ticking clock. Time running out. How long did I have before Richard tried again? How would he do it next time? Would he tamper with my medication, stage another accident, wait until I was asleep and smother me with a pillow? He helped me into the car with exaggerated care, making sure the nurse saw what a devoted husband he was. He adjusted my seatbelt, placed a pillow between me and the door for comfort, made sure my walker was secured in the back seat. "You're going to be fine, Mrs. Patterson," the nurse said, patting my hand. "Your husband will take good care of you, and you have the hospital's number if you need anything." I wanted to tell her, wanted to grab her hand and beg her not to let me go. But what would I say? My husband tried to kill me, but everyone thinks I'm confused? The drive home was quiet. Richard made small talk about the weather. Cold front coming in, might see frost by the weekend. About how nice it would be to have me home. He'd missed me. The house felt empty without me. About how he'd prepared the guest room so I wouldn't have to navigate the stairs. New sheets, a bedside table with everything I might need, a bell I could ring if I needed help. "Claire offered to stay on," he said casually, as if mentioning that the mail had arrived or that he'd picked up groceries. "To help with your care. She feels terrible about what happened and wants to help however she can." I told her that would be wonderful. I hope that's all right with you. No. It absolutely was not all right. It was the worst possible scenario. But what could I say? That I knew Claire had tried to kill me? That I'd watched her loosen the carpet runner on the security footage? That I knew she was sleeping with my husband and planning to take over my life? Richard would say I was confused. The head injury. The medication. Poor Catherine, she's not thinking clearly. Look how paranoid she's become. That's fine, I said quietly, forcing the words out. That's very kind of her. Richard smiled, the kind of smile that probably looked warm to anyone who didn't know what I knew. She feels terrible about what happened. She wants to help. I bet she did. The house looked exactly the same when we pulled into the driveway. Same white shutters that needed repainting. Same brick facade with the ivy climbing up the left side. Same oak tree in the front yard that my grandfather had planted when he built the house. Now massive and majestic with branches that had watched 3 generations grow up. But it didn't feel the same. It felt like enemy territory, a battlefield, a trap. Richard helped me inside, supporting me as I shuffled with my walker across the threshold and into the foyer. Every movement was painful. My hips screamed in protest. My ribs ached with each breath. But I made it. The stairs loomed to my right. I couldn't help but look at them, my eyes drawn to the site of my attempted murder. The carpet runner was gone. In its place was fresh, pristine hardwood. The stairs looked different, newer, cleaner, safer. I had it removed, Richard said, following my gaze. I couldn't stand to look at it after what happened, and I had the stairs refinished so there wouldn't be any reminders. Reminders. He meant evidence. The runner that Claire had loosened was gone. Probably destroyed. Burned or thrown away or cut into pieces. No way to prove it had been deliberately sabotaged. No way to test it for tampering. Thank you, I made myself say, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. That's thoughtful. He led me to the guest room on the first floor, the one that had been his mother's room during the 6 months she'd lived with us before we'd moved her to assisted living. Small and cozy, with a double bed covered in a wedding ring quilt, and an adjoining bathroom with grab bars I'd had installed for his mother. Someone, Claire probably, had made the bed with fresh sheets. White sheets with tiny blue flowers. There were fresh flowers on the nightstand, yellow roses in a crystal vase. My bathrobe laid out on the bed, my slippers placed neatly on the floor. My medications organized in a plastic tray, bottles lined up like soldiers. It looked welcoming, like someone had put thought and care into making me comfortable. It felt like a trap, like a spider's web, beautiful and deadly. I'll let you rest, Richard said, helping me sit on the edge of the bed, his hands supporting me with practiced care. Claire will be here in an hour to help you settle in. I need to run to the pharmacy to pick up your pain medication. They said it wouldn't be ready until 2 o'clock. He left before I could respond, his footsteps retreating down the hallway, the front door opening and closing, his car starting in the driveway. I sat carefully on the edge of the bed, every movement sending jolts of pain through my hip and ribs. My phone was on the nightstand. Richard had returned it that morning at the hospital, saying he'd kept it charged for me, had made sure I didn't miss anything important. I picked it up with shaking hands, half expecting it to be locked or wiped or somehow disabled. But it worked. The screen lit up. My apps were still there. 43 messages. Most from before the fall, friends I hadn't responded to, group chats I'd missed, spam from retailers offering sales I didn't care about, and one message from 2 days ago that made my blood run cold, that made my heart pound so hard I could hear it in my ears. From my lawyer, Patricia Mendez. Catherine, I've been trying to reach you. You submitted a request to update your will 3 weeks ago to establish a charitable trust. I have the documents ready for signing, but you haven't returned my calls. Please call me when you can. This is urgent. I need your signature before these changes can take effect. 3 weeks ago. I hadn't requested any changes to my will 3 weeks ago. I hadn't contacted Patricia about anything. I hadn't even thought about my will in months, maybe years. But someone had. Someone using my name, my email, my information. And I knew exactly who. I'd told Richard I was thinking about updating my will. It had been a casual conversation over dinner, maybe 2 months ago, back when I still trusted him, back when I thought we were partners. I'd mentioned wanting to do something more for the women's shelter where I volunteered, the place where I'd spent one morning a week for the past 3 years organizing donations and teaching basic financial literacy classes. Maybe set up a trust to support it after I died. Maybe ensure that women leaving dangerous situations would have resources. Richard had seemed supportive, had even suggested I talk to Patricia about the best way to structure it, had said it was admirable that I wanted to leave a legacy. Now I understood. He'd taken that information and used it against me, had contacted Patricia pretending to be me, or claiming I'd asked him to reach out on my behalf, had started the process of changing my will to leave my assets to charity instead of to him. If I died from the fall, the new will wouldn't have been signed yet. Everything would have defaulted to the existing will, which left everything to Richard. The house, my savings, my retirement accounts, my grandmother's jewelry, everything. But the request would have been on file, evidence that I'd wanted to give my money away, that I'd been planning to leave Richard with nothing or very little. Motive. He was establishing motive for why he couldn't have killed me. Look, she was leaving everything to charity anyway. I wouldn't get anything. Why would I risk everything to hurt her when I had nothing to gain? Except the timing was wrong. He'd started this process before the fall, 3 weeks before, which meant he'd been planning this for at least 3 weeks, possibly longer, maybe months, maybe years, maybe from the moment my grandmother died and left me this house. My hands shook as I called Patricia's office, hoping she was there, hoping she'd answer, hoping I could fix this before it was too late. Patricia Mendez's office, how may I help you? A receptionist's voice, professional and efficient. This is Catherine Patterson. I need to speak with Patricia urgently. Oh, Mrs. Patterson, Patricia has been trying to reach you. We heard about your accident. Are you all right? Let me put you through right away. A moment later, Patricia's warm, professional voice came on the line. Catherine, thank goodness. I've been so worried. Are you all right? Your husband mentioned you'd had a terrible accident when he called yesterday. When did he call you? Yesterday afternoon. He said you'd fallen down the stairs and were in the hospital, that you'd be recovering for several weeks. He wanted to let me know so I wouldn't keep bothering you about the will. He seemed very concerned about you. I felt terrible that I hadn't known. I would have visited if I'd realized how serious it was. Of course he'd called her. Of course he was managing that relationship too, controlling the narrative, making sure everyone had the story he wanted them to have. Patricia, I need to ask you something important. Who contacted you about updating my will? A pause on the other end, the sound of papers shuffling. You did. Or rather, someone did using your email address. I assumed it was you. It came from the email address we have on file. The tone seemed consistent with how you usually communicate. Why? What exactly did the email say? Just that you'd been thinking about your estate planning and wanted to set up a charitable trust. You asked me to draft documents leaving your house and primary assets to a trust benefiting the women's shelter you volunteer with. The email said you wanted to make sure your legacy supported women in crisis, that you'd been thinking about mortality and wanted to make sure everything was in order. It seemed consistent with conversations we'd had in the past about your values, so I drafted the paperwork as requested. When you didn't respond to my calls to schedule a signing, I started to worry something was wrong. Patricia, I didn't send that email. I never requested those changes. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear her breathing, could imagine her sitting in her office processing this information. Are you sure? Could you have sent it and forgotten? Sometimes with stress or medication? Positive. I'm absolutely certain. What email address did it come from? She read it off. My email address. The one I'd had for years, the same one listed on all my accounts, the one I used for everything from Amazon orders to communication with friends. Someone accessed my email and sent that request pretending to be me. Catherine, Patricia's voice had changed, had become serious and careful. That's identity fraud. That's a crime. Do you know who might have done that? Who has access to your email password? I closed my eyes, feeling tears prick at the corners. Yes, my husband. Then I told her everything. The fall, that wasn't an accident. The whispered conversation I'd heard while lying broken at the bottom of the stairs. Claire's involvement, her smile, her deliberate sabotage, the security footage that proved it was premeditated. Richard's plan to let me die. The pills Jake had warned me about, the carefully constructed narrative of an unstable alcoholic wife. Patricia listened in absolute silence. I could hear her breathing, the occasional scratch of pen on paper as she took notes. But she didn't interrupt, didn't express disbelief, didn't tell me I was mistaken or confused. When I finished, she said quietly, "This is attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud. This is serious, Catherine. Very serious." I know, but I don't know how to prove it in a way anyone will believe. Richard's already convinced the police I have a drinking problem and memory issues from the head injury. He's charming and believable and has an answer for everything. Do you still have access to the security footage? Yes, on my phone. I sent screenshots to the paramedic who saved me, Jake. He believed me. He heard what Richard said. Send it to me. All of it. Every frame. I'll have our investigator examine it, verify it hasn't been tampered with. We work with a digital forensics expert who can authenticate security footage, prove it's genuine, establish chain of custody. Richard will say I edited it, that I fabricated evidence because I'm angry or vindictive. Let him try. Digital forensics can prove whether footage has been altered. Modern security systems embed metadata, timestamps, encryption. It's very difficult to fake convincingly. And the timeline of the email requesting the will change, combined with the fall, combined with what the paramedic heard, it's a pattern. It's evidence of premeditation and planning. Hope stirred in my chest, small and fragile and almost painful in its intensity. What should I do? How do I protect myself? First, are you safe right now? Are you alone with him? I looked at the closed door to my room, listened for sounds of Richard returning, of Claire arriving, of danger approaching. Nothing yet, just the old house settling, the creak of floorboards, the whistle of wind through gaps in the windows. I'm alone in the house right now. Richard went to get my medication. Claire is coming soon. He's arranged for her to help care for me. Catherine, I don't think you should stay there. It's not safe. Can you go to a friend's house, a hotel, anywhere but that house with those people? I can barely walk. I have a walker and a shattered hip and broken ribs, and I'm supposed to have surgery in 2 weeks. I can't just leave. I don't have anyone who can take me in, who can provide the level of care I need. The hospital checked. There's no rehab facility my insurance will cover. I'm stuck. Then we need to move quickly. Patricia's voice had become brisk, efficient, the voice of someone used to handling crises. I'm going to contact the police immediately, show them the footage and the email. We'll build a case. But in the meantime, you need to be extremely careful. Don't eat or drink anything your husband gives you unless it's sealed from a restaurant or store. Don't take any medication he provides directly. Insist on having the pharmacy bottles, check that the seals haven't been broken. And document everything, every conversation, every interaction. Take notes with dates and times. If he says something suspicious, record it if you can. Okay. Send me that footage now. And Catherine? Her voice softened. If you feel threatened, if anything happens, if you sense immediate danger, call 911 immediately. Don't wait. Don't try to handle it yourself. Your life is more important than building a legal case. I promised I would, my voice thick with emotion. After we hung up, I pulled up the security camera app with shaking fingers and sent Patricia the footage from the day of the fall. The file was large, took several minutes to upload. I watched the progress bar creep across the screen, willing it to move faster. Then I went back further in the camera history, looking for anything else that might be useful. Anything that might prove Richard had been planning this for longer than just the day of the fall. What I found made me feel sick, made my stomach churn with nausea that had nothing to do with my injuries and everything to do with betrayal. 3 weeks ago, The same day the email to Patricia had been sent, there was footage of Richard in my study, the small room on the second floor where I kept my desk and filing cabinets and all my personal papers. He was going through my desk drawers with methodical precision, not frantically searching but carefully examining. Finding the password notebook I kept hidden in the back of the filing cabinet, the one I'd thought was secure because who would think to look there? The notebook where I'd stupidly written down all my important passwords because I could never remember them. Email, bank accounts, investment accounts, everything. I knew it was a security risk. New experts said never to write down passwords, but I was terrible at remembering them, and I'd thought the locked filing cabinet in my private study was safe enough. Richard had photographed every page with his phone. I could see the flash of his camera, could see him methodically flipping through pages, documenting everything. I kept scrolling, my horror growing with each new discovery. 2 weeks ago, Richard meeting with Claire in the kitchen late at night after he thought I was asleep. The cameras had no audio, but their body language told a story that made my chest tight with humiliation and rage. The way Richard touched her face with obvious tenderness. The way Claire leaned into him, comfortable and intimate. The long kiss before she left, through the back door, his hand tangled in her hair. How long had the affair been going on? Months? Since she was hired 6 months ago? Longer? Had he been cheating on me before Claire with other women throughout our marriage? 1 week before the fall, Claire going upstairs with a toolkit, small canvas bag that I recognized from the garage, going to the carpet runner with clear purpose, testing it with her fingers, pulling at the tack strips to see how they were attached, figuring out how to loosen it in a way that would look accidental but would definitely cause a fall. They'd planned this meticulously. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a sudden decision. This was calculated, researched, rehearsed. And I'd had no idea, no suspicion, no clue that my husband and our nanny were plotting to kill me. I sent all of it to Patricia. Every damning moment, every piece of evidence. The files took forever to upload over our home Wi-Fi, the progress bars moving with agonizing slowness. Then I deleted the sent messages from my phone just in case Richard went through it, cleared the email history, the app history, anything that might show what I'd done. I was exhausted. My hip throbbed with deep, grinding pain. My head ached from the concussion that still hadn't fully healed. My ribs protested with every breath. But for the first time since the fall, I felt something other than fear. I felt angry. Richard had tried to kill me, had planned it for weeks, maybe months, had manipulated me, isolated me, stolen my passwords and my identity and my trust, had violated our marriage vows in every possible way, had literally tried to end my life for money and a house and freedom to be with his mistress. And he'd almost gotten away with it, but he wouldn't. I'd make sure of it. The front door opened. Richard's footsteps in the foyer. The rustle of a pharmacy bag, the clink of pill bottles. I quickly closed all the apps on my phone, returned to the home screen, set it back on the nightstand. He appeared in my doorway moments later, all concern and care. His expression carefully arranged, his voice pitched just right. "I got your medications," he said, holding up the white paper bag. "Pain pills, anti-inflammatories, antibiotics for infection prevention. The pharmacist said to take the pain medication every 6 hours with food and the antibiotic twice a day. Are you hungry? I can make you something. Maybe soup? Toast? I'm okay for now," I said carefully, keeping my voice weak and tired, playing the role of invalid wife. "Maybe later." He sat down in the chair beside my bed, pulling pill bottles out of the bag one by one. I watched his hands, wondering if those hands had touched me with love at some point or if it had all been performance from the beginning. "The doctor said you should take the pain medication every 6 hours," he said, reading labels. "And the antibiotic twice a day with food. Let's get you started. You must be hurting after the car ride." He opened the pain medication bottle with a familiar crack of the safety seal and shook out 2 pills into his palm, white and oval and innocuous looking. "Here," he said, holding them out with a glass of water from my nightstand. Water that had been sitting there. How long? Had he put it there before he left? You must be in pain. Let's get you comfortable so you can rest. I looked at the pills in his palm. Were they really what the bottle said? Or were they something else? Something that would make me confused, sleepy, vulnerable? Something that would make another accident easier to explain? Jake's warning echoed in my mind. Don't take any medication unless the nurse gives it to you directly. But I wasn't in the hospital anymore. I was home. And if I refused to take medication Richard gave me, if I started questioning everything, he'd know I suspected something. He'd know his plan had failed. He'd know I remembered what he'd said, what he'd done. I needed to keep him thinking I was ignorant, trusting. The same naive wife I'd always been. Thank you, I said, taking the pills from his hand. I put them in my mouth and took a small sip of water, just enough to make it look convincing. But I didn't swallow. I held the pills under my tongue, against my cheek, and pretended to swallow with exaggerated effort. Made a face like it hurt to swallow, which wasn't hard because my throat was still raw. Richard watched me carefully, his eyes tracking the movement of my throat. Good. You should start feeling better soon. The pain medication is pretty strong, so you might get drowsy. That's normal. Your body needs rest to heal. I nodded, keeping the pills carefully hidden in my mouth, trying not to let them dissolve. He stood, looking satisfied. I'll let you rest. Call if you need anything. I'll be right upstairs in my study. The moment he left, closing the door gently behind him, I spit the pills into my hand. They were wet and starting to dissolve, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. But I could still read the imprint on them, could still make out the numbers and letters stamped into the surface. Not the pain medication the doctor had prescribed. Not even close. Something else. Something I didn't recognize. I pulled out my phone and Googled the imprint code with shaking fingers. Zolpidem, a sleeping medication. High dose. He was trying to drug me. Make me sleep deeply. Make me vulnerable and unconscious and helpless. I wrapped the dissolving pills in a tissue and hid them in my nightstand drawer, pushing them to the very back behind the Bible that had been there since Richard's mother lived in this room. Evidence. More proof that Richard was actively trying to harm me. An hour later, Claire arrived with groceries and that same sweet smile I'd always trusted. She knocked lightly on my door before entering, carrying a wooden tray. Catherine, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I made you some soup. Chicken soup, your favorite. You must be starving. Homemade chicken soup in a white ceramic bowl. It smelled delicious. Onions and carrots, and that distinctive chicken broth scent that meant someone had spent time cooking. I'd watched her make this soup dozens of times. Had eaten it dozens of times when I was sick or tired or stressed. Always grateful for her kindness and domestic skills. Had praised her cooking. Had thanked her for being so helpful and thoughtful. Now I wondered if she'd poisoned it. Thank you, I said, accepting the tray. That's so kind. It's the least I can do, Claire said, setting the tray on my lap with practiced care. I feel just terrible about what happened. If I'd been there earlier that day, if I'd noticed the runner was loose, I'll never forgive myself. Such convincing lies. Such Oscar-worthy performance. If I didn't know the truth, I'd believe she was genuinely guilt-ridden. It's not your fault, I made myself say, the words tasting like ash. It was an accident. These things happen. Relief flickered across her face. The same relief I'd seen after the fall, when she'd thought I was dying. She thought I didn't remember. Thought I didn't know. Thought she was safe. Eat up, she said, gesturing to the soup. You need your strength to heal. And Richard said you'll be having surgery in 2 weeks. You need to be as strong as possible for that. She left me alone with the soup. I stared at it for a long time. It looked perfect, smelled perfect. Chunks of white chicken meat and carrots and celery in a rich golden broth that was probably delicious. Patricia's voice in my head, Don't eat or drink anything unless it's sealed. But this was soup Claire had made in my kitchen, using my pots and my ingredients and my stove. How could I refuse without raising suspicion? If I didn't eat it, she'd ask questions. Richard would ask questions. They'd know something was wrong. I took a small spoonful and tasted it carefully, just letting it touch my tongue before swallowing. It tasted normal, like it always did, savory and comforting, but I couldn't be sure it was safe. Couldn't know if there was something dissolved in that broth, invisible and tasteless, waiting to make me sick or unconscious or dead. I ate a few more spoonfuls, barely enough to call it a meal, then pushed chunks of chicken and vegetables around to make it look like I'd eaten more than I had. When Claire came back to check on me 20 minutes later, I apologized. I'm sorry, I'm not as hungry as I thought. My stomach is still unsettled from all the hospital medications. Can you save the rest for later? Of course. She took the tray, looking concerned in a way that might have seemed genuine. Should I bring you something else? Toast? Crackers? Tea? I'm fine, just tired. I think the pain medication is making me sleepy. Rest then. That's what your body needs. Healing takes time. After she left, I lay in bed and thought about how to survive the next 2 weeks. 2 weeks until surgery. 2 weeks of being vulnerable and weak, while Richard and Claire had free access to me, my food, my medication, my life. 2 weeks to gather more evidence and build a case strong enough that Patricia and the police couldn't ignore it, couldn't dismiss it, couldn't write off as the paranoid delusions of a head-injured woman. I needed a plan, a strategy, a way to protect myself while appearing weak and unsuspecting. And I needed to execute it perfectly. Because if I made a mistake, if Richard realized I knew the truth, he wouldn't wait for another accident. He'd finish what he'd started. Over the next 3 days, I played my part with an actress's skill. I pretended to take every pill Richard gave me and hid them instead in various locations. The nightstand drawer, the pocket of my bathrobe, wrapped in tissues tucked into the box of tissues on my bedside table. I pretended to eat the meals Claire prepared and quietly disposed of most of the food when they weren't looking. Down the bathroom sink, into the trash can, wrapped in tissues, anywhere I could hide it. I pretended to be weak and confused and dependent while secretly documenting everything on my phone. Photos of the pills, their imprints clearly visible. Notes about what Richard and Claire said and did. Their exact words as close as I could remember. Times and dates of every interaction, evidence, building a case, creating a paper trail that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. At night, when Richard thought I was asleep from medication I hadn't actually taken, when the house was dark and quiet, I watched the security camera feeds on my phone, monitoring what they were doing when they thought I was unconscious, and what I saw made everything worse. Richard and Claire weren't just having an affair. They weren't just waiting for me to conveniently die from my injuries. They were actively planning the next attempt. On the third night, I watched them in the living room, talking quietly, while Richard drank scotch from my grandfather's crystal glasses, and Claire sat curled against him on my grandmother's sofa. The very furniture I'd inherited, that meant family and history and connection to my past. They were defiling it with their plans to destroy me. I couldn't hear what they were saying, the cameras had no audio, but I could read Claire's lips well enough to catch fragments. I'd never realized I had this skill, but desperation had made me attentive to every detail. Too risky. Needs to look natural. Surgery is perfect opportunity. Anesthesia complications happen. Surgery. My hip surgery was scheduled for 10 days from now. They were planning to do something during the surgery, or after, while I was vulnerable and medicated and in the hospital, unable to fight back or protect myself or even call for help. What were they planning? To tamper with my medication? To bribe or manipulate a hospital worker? To sneak in and smother me while I was unconscious? To inject air into my IV line? The possibilities were endless and terrifying. My hands shook as I took screenshots, as I typed notes about what I could see and interpret, as I sent everything to Patricia with trembling fingers. Her response came within minutes, even though it was past midnight. I'm contacting the police tomorrow with everything we have, and this needs to stop now. This is escalating. I'm also going to call the hospital and inform them that you're at risk, that extra security precautions need to be taken. Stay safe. Lock your door. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. Richard was careful, smart. He'd covered his tracks meticulously, had answers prepared for every question, had built a narrative that made him look like the victim of a disturbed wife rather than the perpetrator of an attempted murder. The pills I'd saved? He'd say I was confused, that those were exactly what the doctor prescribed and I'd misread the labels because of my head injury. The footage of them planning? No audio, no proof of what they were actually discussing. They could say they were talking about anything, about selling the house after I died naturally, about what to do if I needed long-term care, about their concerns for my recovery. The email to Patricia? He'd say I must have sent it myself and forgotten due to the head injury and medication confusion. Every piece of evidence I had could be explained away by a skilled defense attorney. And Richard would hire the best. I needed something irrefutable, something that couldn't be spun or reinterpreted or dismissed. I needed a confession. The next morning, I called Patricia again, keeping my voice low even though Richard was supposedly upstairs in his study. I need a favor, I said quietly. Can you get me a recording device? Something small that I can hide? Something they won't notice? Catherine, I don't think that's safe. I need them to confess, on tape, with audio. It's the only way anyone will believe me. It's the only evidence that can't be explained away or dismissed as paranoia. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. I could hear her breathing, could imagine her weighing the legal and ethical implications. Recording someone without their consent is legally complicated. Depending on the circumstances and how it's obtained, it might not be admissible in court. I don't care about admissibility right now. I care about survival. If I have them on tape confessing to attempted murder, even if it can't be used in court, the police will have to take me seriously. They'll have to investigate thoroughly. They won't be able to dismiss me as a confused woman with a head injury. Another pause. Okay, I'll get you something. But you need to be extremely careful. If they realize what you're doing, if they find the device, I'll be careful. I promise. She came by that afternoon, while Richard was at work and Claire was out getting groceries. Patricia brought flowers as a cover. Anyone watching would think she was just a friend visiting an injured woman. But hidden in the elaborate bouquet was a tiny recording device no bigger than a button. It's voice-activated. She explained in whispers as we sat in my room with the door closed, showing me how to turn it on with a tiny switch hidden in what looked like decorative metalwork. It'll record any conversation within a 15-foot radius. 8 hours of battery life. The file uploads automatically to a secure cloud server in real time, so even if they find the device and destroy it, we'll still have the recording. She pinned it to my bathrobe, hidden in the folds of fabric near my shoulder. It looked like a decorative pin, the kind of thing an older woman might wear. Nothing suspicious. Get them talking, Patricia said, her hand squeezing mine. Get them to admit what they did and what they're planning. But Catherine, please be careful. The moment you have what you need, call 911. Don't wait. Don't try to confront them yourself. These people have already tried to kill you once. Don't give them another opportunity. I promised I would. That night, when Richard came to my room with my evening medications, I was ready. My bathrobe was fastened securely, the recording device hidden in its folds. My phone was on the nightstand within reach. My hand was steady even though my heart was pounding. Richard, I said carefully, can we talk? He sat down, immediately, instantly attentive. Of course, sweetheart. What's wrong? Are you in pain? Do you need something? I've been thinking about what happened, about the fall. I let my voice shake slightly, playing the role of confused invalid. I keep having these dreams, these flashes of memory. I don't know if they're real or if it's the medication or the head injury or what. His expression sharpened, tension visible in the way his jaw tightened. What kind of memories? What are you dreaming about? I remember lying at the bottom of the stairs. I remember the pain. Obviously, that's very clear. But I also remember voices, you and Claire. But what you were saying doesn't make sense. It must have been a dream or a hallucination or something. What do you think you heard? His voice was carefully neutral, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. Something about the house, about it being yours, about waiting. But that doesn't make any sense because we own the house together, don't we? Lie. I owned the house solely, had inherited it from my grandmother with clear title. But I wanted to see what he'd say, how he'd respond. You were in shock, Richard said smoothly. His lie delivered with practiced ease. Head injuries can cause all kinds of confusion and false memories. The brain tries to make sense of trauma and sometimes creates narratives that didn't actually happen. I'm sure whatever you think you heard was just your mind trying to process the fall. But it felt so real. And Claire was there too. And she was smiling. Why would she smile when I was hurt? That doesn't make sense either, does it? She wasn't smiling, sweetheart. She was terrified. We both were. It was the worst moment of my life, seeing you lying there, not knowing if you'd survive. More lies, smooth as glass. So I imagined it. The talking, the smiling, all of it. You were traumatized. The brain does strange things when we're in pain and afraid. It creates false memories, confabulation. It's actually very common with head injuries. He was so convincing, so believable. If I didn't know the truth with absolute certainty, I'd believe him completely. Patricia called yesterday, I said, changing tactics. She said someone emailed her about changing my will, setting up a charitable trust. Did I do that? I don't remember doing that. Richard's expression didn't change, but I saw the slightest tension ripple through his body. You mentioned it to me about a month ago. You said you wanted to set up a charitable trust for the women's shelter. You felt strongly about it. Maybe you emailed her and forgot. The head injury could have affected your memory formation around that time. Maybe. I let doubt creep into my voice, let myself sound uncertain and confused. Everything feels muddled lately. I can't remember what's real and what I'm imagining. It's frightening. That's the head injury talking, Richard said gently, reaching out to pat my hand in a gesture that probably looked comforting. You need to give yourself time to heal. Don't worry about the will or the house or anything stressful. Just focus on getting better. That's all that matters right now. What if I don't get better? I asked, infusing my voice with fear that wasn't entirely manufactured. What if I need surgery and something goes wrong? People die from complications, don't they? Anesthesia reactions, infections, blood clots. Nothing's going to go wrong. You're going to be fine. But if it did, if something happened to me during the surgery, you'd be taken care of, right? You'd get the house? This was it. The moment that would either get me a confession or confirm Richard's skill at deception. Catherine, why are you talking like this? You're going to be fine. The surgery is routine. Thousands of people have hip replacements every year. I'm scared, I said. And that part wasn't a lie. I was terrified. I almost died. What if I'd actually died? What would have happened? Richard took my hand, his palm warm and dry and steady. The hand of a man who'd promised to love and protect me 15 years ago in front of everyone we knew. If something had happened to you, which it won't, I would have been devastated. The house would have been the last thing on my mind. I would have been destroyed. But eventually, once you'd grieved, would you have sold it? I don't know. Maybe. It's a big house for one person, and it has so many memories. It might have been too painful to stay. And Claire? Would she have stayed on to help you? Something flickered in his eyes. Quick, almost imperceptible, but I caught it. I suppose that would have depended on whether I needed the help. Why are you asking about Claire? I just wondered. You two seem close. She's been so helpful. She's our employee. She's professional and good at her job. That's all. Such a smooth liar. Such a practiced deceiver. He wasn't going to confess. Not like this. He was too careful, too controlled. I needed to push harder. Over the next week, I pushed every chance I got. I asked questions designed to make him uncomfortable, to make him think I suspected something. I expressed confusion about details that didn't add up. I mentioned the security cameras and whether they'd captured the fall, whether we should check the footage. Richard's answer, I checked already, but unfortunately, the staircase camera wasn't working that day. Must have been a technical glitch. The system is old. We probably need to upgrade it. Lie. I had the footage backed up in multiple locations, but clearly Richard had tried to delete it and thought he'd succeeded. He didn't know about the cloud backup that uploaded everything automatically. Didn't know I'd sent it all to Patricia and Jake. With each conversation, I gathered small pieces. Richard mentioning that Claire was special to him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. Claire saying how nice it would be when things were different and they didn't have to pretend anymore. Richard discussing selling the house to a developer who wanted to tear it down and build luxury condos, saying the neighborhood was ripe for redevelopment and they could make a fortune. All recorded, all saved to Patricia's secure server, in real time, uploading every word. But still no outright confession, no explicit admission of attempted murder, until the night before my surgery. I was supposed to be asleep, heavily sedated from the pre-op medication Richard had given me at dinner, but that I'd secretly spit out later. I lay in bed with my eyes closed, breathing slowly and deeply, playing the part of unconscious patient. Claire had come over after dark, slipping in through the back door. I heard their footsteps in the hallway, heard them settle in the living room directly above my bedroom. The old house carried sounds through the heating vents, and if I was very quiet, I could hear fragments of conversation. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone, muting the sound, and watched them on the screen. Richard was pouring drinks. Claire was curled up on the sofa. They looked comfortable together, intimate, like a couple planning their future. I turned the volume as high as I dared and listened. Tomorrow, Richard was saying, during the surgery, they'll have her sedated for hours. That's when we'll move the money. All of it, Claire asked. Everything I can access. The joint accounts, the investment accounts I have power of attorney over. I'll move it offshore before she wakes up. The banks in the Caymans don't ask questions. And the house? What about the house? That's what we really want. Once the money's moved, I'll tell her she agreed to sell while she was confused from the pain medication. I'll forge her signature on the listing agreement. I've been practicing her signature for weeks. She's already so disoriented from the head injury and all the medication that she won't be able to prove otherwise. And if anyone questions it, I'll say she's not competent to manage her own affairs anymore, that the head injury has affected her cognitive function. What if she figures it out? What if she goes to the police or her lawyer? Then we'll accelerate the plan. Move to phase 2. A pause. Then Claire, her voice smaller. I mean we'll finish what we started on the stairs, but it needs to look natural. An infection from the surgery, maybe. Or a reaction to the pain medication, an accidental overdose. Something no one will question. My blood was ice in my veins. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. Richard, I don't know if I can. Claire's voice wavered. You can, Richard said firmly. You want this life, don't you? This house? Financial security? No more working as a nanny for ungrateful families? No more scrubbing toilets and changing diapers and taking orders from women who look down on you? Of course I do. No, I do. Then we need to be strong. Catherine is the only thing standing between us and the life we deserve. Once she's gone, everything will be ours. The house, the money, freedom. We can travel, buy that condo in Miami you wanted, live the life we've been planning. And you're sure she doesn't remember? Doesn't know what we did? She doesn't remember anything clearly. The head injury scrambled her memories. She's confused and weak and dependent. She's perfect. Perfect for killing, he meant. The recording device pinned to my bathrobe, which I'd worn all day and hadn't taken off, captured every word. I had my confession, clear, explicit, undeniable. With shaking hands, I pulled up Patricia's contact information and sent her a text. I have it. I have them on tape admitting everything. Planning to kill me tomorrow, during surgery, stealing my money, all of it. Her response came within seconds. I'm calling 911 right now. Stay on the line with me. Lock your door. Don't let them know you're awake. Police are being dispatched. I carefully, silently, pushed my door closed and turned the lock with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. Then I called Patricia, putting my phone on silent so they wouldn't hear it ringing from upstairs. Catherine? Patricia's voice was low and urgent. Are you safe? Yes. Door locked. They're upstairs. They don't know I'm awake. Okay, good. I'm on another line with 911. Police are en route to your location. ETA 6 minutes. Can you stay quiet until then? Yes. The longest 6 minutes of my life. I watched the camera feed as Richard and Claire continued talking, oblivious. They were planning their future, my future funeral, how they'd divide my assets. They were discussing whether to have the service at the big church downtown or something smaller and more intimate. They were actually planning my funeral. Then I saw the flash of red and blue lights through the living room window, reflecting off the glass. Saw Richard stand up, confused, his drink sloshing. Saw Claire's face go white, then red, panic transforming her features. Saw them rush to the window as police cars surrounded the house, multiple vehicles forming a perimeter. Heavy pounding on the front door. Police, we have a warrant. Open the door now. I unlocked my bedroom door and shuffled out with my walker as Richard opened the front door to find 4 officers, Patricia and Detective Morris, the same detective who'd taken my statement at the hospital, who'd been skeptical of my claims. His expression was very different now. Richard Patterson and Claire Warren, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud, Morris said formally, his voice hard. Richard's face went blank. That careful mask he wore. This is ridiculous. On what evidence? My wife is confused from a head injury. On the evidence Mrs. Patterson has been gathering for the past 2 weeks, Patricia said, stepping forward, with a tablet in her hands. Video footage of Claire sabotaging the carpet runner. Audio recordings of you discussing your plans to kill her, recorded less than 30 minutes ago. Bank records showing you've been systematically siphoning money from her accounts. Email records of identity fraud. Did you really think she wouldn't figure it out? Richard's eyes found mine across the foyer. The mask finally dropped. No more loving husband. No more concern or care or false devotion. Just hatred. Pure, undiluted hatred. You, he breathed, his voice shaking with rage. You've been awake this whole time. The confusion, the memory problems, the medication compliance, it was all an act. You've been playing me. Yes, I said clearly, my voice stronger than I'd let it be in weeks. It was all an act. Just like your concern was an act. Your love was an act. Everything you've been for the past 15 years was an act. The only difference is that my act was to save my life. Yours was to end it. Claire started crying, mascara running down her cheeks. I didn't want to hurt you. Richard said you were going to leave him anyway. That you were going to take everything. That you'd changed your will to cut him out. I thought you thought you'd kill me first, I said, meeting her eyes without flinching. You loosened that carpet runner knowing I'd fall. You stood over me while I was dying and smiled. You tried to poison my food and tamper with my medication. You plan to kill me during surgery tomorrow. Don't you dare pretend you're a victim. The officers handcuffed them both, reading their rights in that familiar cadence I'd heard on countless TV shows, but never thought would happen in my own home. As they led Richard past me, he stopped, his face inches from mine despite the officer's hand on his arm. I gave you 15 good years, he said quietly, his voice cold. You gave me 15 years of lies, I replied, of manipulation and control and isolation disguised as love. And you'll give the state the next 25 years in prison. They took him away. Claire was still sobbing as they put her in a separate police car, her hands cuffed behind her back. I'm sorry, she kept saying. I'm so sorry. But she wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she'd been caught. Detective Morris approached me, looking chagrined. Mrs. Patterson, I owe you an apology. A significant apology. I should have listened more carefully to what you were saying at the hospital. I let your husband control the narrative, and I almost let a murderer go free. He's very convincing, I said simply. He's had 15 years of practice. We'll need your full statement. And all the evidence you've gathered, every piece of footage, every recording, every note. But it can wait until morning. I'm sure you're exhausted. I was exhausted, bone-tired in a way that had nothing to do with my injuries and everything to do with the emotional toll of the past 2 weeks. I'm supposed to have surgery tomorrow, I said. Hip replacement. We'll post an officer outside your hospital room, Morris said. Round-the-clock protection. You'll be safe. And I'll personally oversee the investigation to make sure nothing is missed. Patricia stayed with me that night, helping me process what had happened. She made tea, checking that the tea bags were sealed. The water came from a bottle she'd brought herself. She helped me pack a bag for the hospital. She sat with me while I cried, finally letting out the fear and betrayal and horror I'd been holding in for 2 weeks. You did an incredibly brave thing, she said, and incredibly dangerous. You could have been killed. I didn't have a choice. It was survival. Still, not many people could have pulled that off. Could have stayed calm enough, smart enough, brave enough to gather evidence while their murderer had complete access to them. I had good help. You, Jake, Amy, the cloud backup system. I couldn't have done it alone. The surgery went well. When I woke up in the recovery room, Patricia was there. Jake was there, having stopped by during his shift. Jennifer had somehow found out and was there too, crying with relief and guilt and a dozen other emotions. I had no idea, Jennifer kept saying, holding my hand. I should have seen it. I should have known something was wrong. You pulled away and I let you. And I should have pushed harder. He was very convincing, I said, my voice hoarse from the breathing tube. He fooled everyone, including me for most of our marriage. Over the next several months, as I healed and learned to walk again and went through intensive physical therapy, the case against Richard and Claire built steadily. The prosecution charged them with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, identity theft, and a dozen other crimes I'd never heard of. Apparently, planning to kill someone generates a lot of criminal charges. Richard's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, tried to claim Claire had manipulated him, that he'd been under her influence, that he'd never have done any of this without her constant pressure and seduction. Painted him as the victim of a scheming younger woman. Claire's lawyer did the same in reverse. Claimed Richard had manipulated her, that she'd been terrified of him, that he'd threatened her if she didn't help. Painted her as a frightened abuse victim who'd had no choice. But the evidence was too strong. The video footage showing Claire sabotaging the carpet runner on her own, with no one forcing her. The audio recordings of them planning together as equal partners. The bank records showing Richard had been systematically stealing for months. The testimony from Jake and Amy about what they'd witnessed. The forensic analysis of my medication showing Richard had been substituting sleeping pills for pain medication. And my testimony. I testified at the preliminary hearing about 15 years of marriage. About the isolation I hadn't recognized as abuse until it was almost too late. About the control I'd mistaken for care. About the fall and what I'd heard and the terrible weeks after, pretending to be weak while gathering evidence, knowing that one mistake could cost me my life. The judge bound both of them over for trial without hesitation. At the trial itself, which took place 8 months after my fall, the jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on all counts, both of them. At sentencing 2 months later, I gave a victim impact statement. I'd worked on it for weeks, revising and editing, trying to capture everything I wanted to say. Richard Patterson didn't just try to kill me for money, I said, looking directly at him across the courtroom. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He tried to kill me after systematically destroying my sense of self for 15 years. He isolated me from friends, told me they didn't really care about me. He made me doubt my own perceptions and memories, told me I was confused or mistaken, or imagining things whenever I questioned him. He took a woman who'd been confident and independent and turned her into someone small and uncertain and easy to manipulate. I took a breath, my hip aching from standing too long, and continued. But I survived. And in surviving, I found out who I really am. Not the person Richard tried to make me, not the weak, confused woman he needed me to be, but someone stronger, someone who fought back, someone who gathered evidence and built a case and refused to be a victim. I looked at him then, made him meet my eyes. I hope he spends every day of his prison sentence thinking about that, about the fact that the woman he thought he'd broken was the one who broke him instead, about the fact that his perfect plan failed because I was smarter and stronger and more determined to live than he anticipated. The judge sentenced Richard to 25 years in state prison. Claire got 15. Neither showed any remorse during sentencing. Richard maintained his innocence even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Claire cried, but never apologized for what she'd actually done, only for getting caught. I went home after the sentencing to my house. Truly my house now, with all legal claims from Richard dissolved, the divorce finalized while he was in jail awaiting trial. The house felt different, lighter, like a weight had been lifted, like I could finally breathe. I'd had the staircase refinished again, this time exactly how I wanted it. New hardwood in a lighter shade, new railing with a better grip, no carpet runner. I wanted nothing that would remind me of that day. Every time I climbed those stairs, which I could do now after 6 months of intensive physical therapy, without a walker or even a cane, I thought about the fall, about how close I'd come to dying, about how different my life would be if that smartwatch hadn't called for help, if Jake hadn't been perceptive enough to sense something was wrong, if I hadn't been brave enough to gather evidence, and about how far I'd come since. I started volunteering at the women's shelter again, but with a different role. This time, not just organizing donation drives, but speaking to women about recognizing the signs of abuse, about trusting your instincts when something feels wrong, about the fact that love shouldn't make you smaller or weaker or more isolated, that real love builds you up rather than tearing you down. Jennifer came over every week, usually on Thursday evenings. She'd apologized hundreds of times for not seeing what was happening, for not pushing harder when Richard kept saying I was busy, and I'd forgiven her hundreds of times. You couldn't have known, I'd told her repeatedly. I didn't even know, and I lived it. Richard was an expert manipulator. That's what abusers do. They isolate their victims so gradually that no one notices until it's too late. But I should have trusted my instincts. I felt like something was off, like you were pulling away. But Richard always had such reasonable explanations. That's how it works. Abusers are masters of reasonable explanations. Jake and Amy became real friends. The kind you keep forever, because they saved your life in more ways than one. We had dinner once a month, traded stories, laughed about safer topics than attempted murder. Patricia handled my legal affairs and became a confidant, someone I could trust with the messiest parts of my story. I was building a new life, a real life, one based on honesty and genuine connection instead of manipulation and lies. One where I made my own choices, kept my own passwords, decided my own future. 6 months after the sentencing, I hosted a small dinner party. Jennifer and her family, Patricia and her wife, Jake and Amy and their partners. 8 people who'd helped me survive, who'd believed me, who'd supported me through the darkest time of my life. We ate at my grandmother's dining table, laughed in my grandfather's living room, celebrated in my house. To Catherine, Jennifer said, raising her glass of wine, the strongest person I know. To survival, I corrected, lifting my own glass. And to the people who helped me survive. I couldn't have done it without all of you. You saved me in ways that have nothing to do with calling 911 or testifying in court. You saw me when I felt invisible. You believed me when I felt like I was going crazy. Thank you. We drank and talked late into the night until the conversation became the comfortable drone of old friends who don't need to perform for each other. After everyone had gone home, after the dishes were washed and the leftover food was wrapped and stored away, I walked through my house, turning off lights and checking locks and feeling safe. Truly safe. For the first time in years. Maybe for the first time in my entire marriage. I paused at the bottom of the staircase and looked up. This was where it had happened, where I'd fallen, where Richard had stood over me and whispered his plans, where I'd almost died, but also where I'd decided to fight back, where I'd decided to survive, where I'd squeezed Jake's hand and started the long journey from victim to survivor. I climbed the stairs slowly, my new hip still aching sometimes when I overworked it, and went to my bedroom. My real bedroom now, the master bedroom on the second floor that I'd reclaimed after months of living in the guest room. I'd redecorated completely, erasing every trace of Richard. New paint on the walls, new furniture purchased with money from my grandmother's trust. New bedding in colors Richard had never liked. Everything mine. Everything chosen by me, for me. Tomorrow, I had a meeting at the shelter about starting a support group for abuse survivors. Women who'd left dangerous situations and were trying to rebuild their lives. I was going to co-facilitate with a therapist I'd been seeing, someone who specialized in domestic violence. Next week, I was having lunch with my cousin Sarah in California, the one I hadn't seen in 5 years, because Richard had always found reasons to postpone trips to visit my family. Sarah was flying out to spend a long weekend with me, and we were going to hike and talk and reconnect. Next month, I was taking a trip to Italy with Jennifer and revisiting the country where Richard and I had honeymooned, but this time making new memories that belonged only to me and my friend. I was reclaiming my life, piece by piece. And I was learning that falling down didn't mean staying down. That survival wasn't just about living, but about choosing to truly live. I'd fallen, and I'd gotten back up, and I'd won. Not just in court, though that mattered, but in the bigger sense, I'd won back myself. The person I'd been before Richard started reshaping me. The confident, independent woman who'd been buried under 15 years of subtle manipulation. I changed into pajamas and climbed into bed, my bed, in my house, in my life that belonged to no one but me. The security system beeped as I armed it for the night. System activated, all zones secure. That sound used to just be background noise, something I barely noticed. Now it was a victory cry, a reminder that I was safe because I'd made myself safe, that I'd survived because I'd been smart and brave and refused to give up. I was safe. I was home. I was free. And no one would ever take that from me again. I turned off the light and slept peacefully, knowing that tomorrow I'd wake up and continue building the life I deserved. The life Richard had tried to steal. The life I'd fought to keep. Mine.